The legendary mangaka Junji Ito surely draws influences from H.P. Lovecraft and H.R. Giger, but his work has the eerie aloofness of David Lynch, where the reader's imagination cannot help but craft its own fearful outcomes that may diverge entirely or never fully materialize with Ito's own outcomes. I'm not a horror fan, and Ito's work is often far too disturbing visually for my taste, but his attention to his craft is no less fascinating and extraordinary. However, in watching these man-bend videos with the great mangaka Naoki Urasawa, I realized that I like Ito's work while it is in progress. The imagery may still be grotesque, but it is the progressive layers of detail that literally generate a physical repulsion that is hard to explain. But lest anyone think this is limited strictly to Junji Ito or to Japanese artists alone, I feel the same way looking at the work of American comics artists like Richard Corbin. Corbin's work is entirely different, and yet I find it repulsive even while recognizing that it is incredibly skillful. One academic term that seems obvious is aesthetic disgust. However, a more scientific term may be trypophobia, but it's not particularly accurate because it is a relatively specific repulsion to images with multiple holes that recur in nature. In some cases, this may be certain types of vegetation or even honeycombs, none of which bothers me at all, but may have some mild correlation between the repetition of the same geometric shapes, even in a natural setting, and they may affect the mind in some way when studying them. And surely Ito's own intensely detailed imagery can prove mind-altering. And in a piece like Layers of Fear, where he creates a visual analogy between the layers of bark on trees and layers of human flesh, melding the two within a central character, the description begins to sound increasingly apt. A 2013 paper in the Journal of Psychological Science quotes how one sufferer feels when facing a holy image. Quote, "I can't really face small, irregularly or asymmetrically placed holes. They make me throw up in my mouth, cry a little bit, and shake all over deeply," attributed to Jennifer Welsh in 2015. This may be related to an ancient impulse that such objects are potentially toxic or poisonous, which is perfectly logical in many ways, even if ultimately it may be an illogical response, given that the person may only be looking at a still image or a video. The most interesting term, however, is the so-called Uncanny Valley, and not solely because it sounds like a comic. I think the moment I describe the meaning of the Uncanny Valley, that most people will have an innate understanding of what it means. Essentially, it is the nausea to describe a mannequin or robot that looks too realistic, but is of course not imbued with human life. Quote, "As artificial representations of humans become more and more realistic, they reach a point where they stop being endearing and become creepy, a point known as the Uncanny Valley. For example, C-3PO and R2-D2 are cute because they're robots, and they're not supposed to look like human beings." Unquote. However, fabricated objects like real sex dolls, the CGI visage of Robert Patrick's T-1000 in Terminator 2, and often deepfake images of world leaders and actors, or more likely actresses, all maintain a distinct creep factor in which they are trying desperately to replicate human mannerisms and emotional reactions so subtle that they are almost imperceptible, and yet we as humans still innately process them and thus recognize something distinctly inhuman. So while C-3PO may have the same basic structure of a human, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, and even facial features, he is still so obviously not human as to more likely be endearing and cute as opposed to creepy and threatening. Of course, it's hard to separate the character traits, so we learn also from actor Anthony Daniels' movements and the 3PO suit and the charm and vulnerability in his voice, but you get the idea. I think work like Ito's and Corbin's as well actually generates a blend of these two responses. Ito engages in trypophobic imagery, but he also brings into the Uncanny Valley his drawings of humanity and its various mutations. Because his work finds just enough representative realism as regards the human figure to creep us out with the recognition of ourselves. Ironically, the man who coined the phrase Uncanny Valley is also Japanese. The roboticist Masahiro Mori now 96 years old, had a breakthrough when studying human emotional responses to non-human entities that approximated humans, such as puppets, certain toys, and early prosthetics. As Jackson Arn explains in his article about Mori on artsy.net, Mori extrapolated a generation of robots that would inspire revulsion in their users because they looked too human. When the world finally caught up, he found himself highly in demand, not just among roboticists, but computer scientists, philosophers, designers, and artists. Mori was highly original in some ways, derivative in others. At the core of his most famous essay is a whimsical and rather unscientific graph in which he plots the, quote, human likeness of various things: a toy robot, a healthy person, a doll, an ill person, and even a zombie, against their hypothetical shinwaken, i.e. affinity. He drew inspiration from his country's rich theater tradition, arguing that his famous Bunraku puppets were both highly lifelike and highly likable, but perhaps only because audiences viewed them from the comfort of their seats. In a bit of etymology, the term uncanny has actually been around since the 16th century, and it was none other than Sigmund Freud who in 1919 put a finer point on its definition by linking it to the disturbing qualities of dolls, puppets, and wax figures. Once again, our familiarity with these figures melded with their inhuman qualities, and thus Freud determined that the more familiar, which I would think translates to the more human, the more strange they appeared. Ito does incorporate holes, rivulets, endlessly niggling and noodling textures that pockmark and scar his characters to the point that they can alternately look reptilian or like they are in various stages of decay. Given that this is Junji Ito, both can certainly be true. He has drawn characters that are reptilian, and he has also drawn many in various stages of transformation and decay. Decay is a reason I think so many people embrace zombie literature and media. It is a means of confronting and normalizing a very human fear regarding our own physical bodies being eaten away and rotted by the elements. And strangely enough, seeing hordes of zombies gives a sense of repetition regarding the process, to the point where viewers become inured to the one disturbing visual aspect of decay and embrace it, become more comfortable with it, and less disgusted and horrified by the process. What makes Ito's work so disturbing is that he is not subject to portraying decay in the same way we have seen it innumerable times in Western culture. Whether his perspective is uniquely Japanese or, more importantly, uniquely Junji Ito, means that it is also more foreign, different in how it represents those images we were supposedly inured to, and thus more frightening and/or vastly more discomforting and disturbing. Ultimately, while Ito doesn't deal with the sort of realism that both Freud and Mori believed were the tipping point, his 2D figure drawing is highly effective at presenting humanity within the context of his fantastical and nightmarish milieus. This, combined with Ito's mutated humans, and particularly his obsessive texturing, for decades done with a crow quill, must trigger some element of trypophobia as well. His version of humanity looks as toxic and dangerous as the most poisonous plants and animals the phobia is associated with. Or at least that's my best attempt at explaining the otherworldly and repulsive effects of Junji Ito's work. Junji Ito was a featured guest at the 2023 San Diego Comic-Con, where it was noted that he now works only digital, which is quite surprising given his techniques here where he doesn't even resort to a brush pen. And as you can see, a crow quill dip pen is painstaking when dealing with this degree of detailed texturing. Ito, however, makes it look easy and uneventful. He appears to see every mark in his mind's eye before he commits it to paper. Also seeing video from Comic-Con of Ito originals on display from 1991 Shiver, Ito was at the time actively engaging in the sort of trypophobic imagery that suggests that he knew exactly what he was doing. Shiver features drawings of humans, animals, and plants riddled with holes, making each look like Swiss cheese, and it's almost shocking to be reminded that Ito has been immersed in this sort of imagery for over 30 years and still seems to have maintained his sanity, on the surface at least. But as with all Man-Bin videos, Urasawa-san's intent is to reveal the mysterious processes, tools, and techniques of the guest artist. So here we are back to discussing Ito's preference for Maru pen nibs, because they offer a greater variation of thin to thick lines, and are known for producing crisp lines that are great for adding detail to drawings. Again, the fact that he's using these nibs, regardless of their versatility for actually filling in blacks, and even for doing corrections with whiteout, is kind of mind-boggling. Additionally, switching to digital means no original art, which can be a major source of an artist's income. However, one would assume, or certainly hope, that given his global popularity, that Ito is financially set by now, and also if digital artwork allows him to be more productive, then that can simply mean more published work, which may make up for the lack of original art sales anyway. Even at this point, Ito is in fact using digital for his screen tones, which is basically the only approach used by modern artists. In fact, the renowned Dinotopia artist James Gurney wrote a blog post as far back as 2009 in a series titled Dead Tech, in which he described the tangible sheets of Zipatone as, quote, an obsolete graphic design material that would let you place a halftone dot screen across an area of black and white illustration. Also marketed as Letratone, it came as a thin plastic film with a slight adhesive over a backing sheet, unquote. As you can see by the video, the reason for Zip's obsolescence is quite obvious. Not only does digital screen toning offer an infinite array of patterns, but it is applicable and adjustable in one touch with no messy glue stick and without the cost or hassle of buying sheets of Zip, which for starving artists was not an insignificant cost. Nevertheless, physical manga screen tone sheets are still available in Japan, perhaps for remaining older mangaka or traditionalists who are beyond the point of changing their approach. To Ito's great credit, he smartly integrates the digital with the analog, at least at the time of this video, which was from 2017. And Ito-san does both expertly, not to take shortcuts, but to enhance his work. At this juncture, Ito would still have original pen and ink artwork. It would just be bereft of the screen tones and certain corrections he made digitally. You can very easily see how Ito would have evolved into working entirely in digital, as even here he shows that he can engage in all the obsessive detail he drew by Maru pen, but now he's creating the very same marks digitally, and the integration is flawless. Also, it's fascinating that he is cradling that controller in his left hand and clicking the corresponding buttons to change the thickness of the digital nib, as well as toggling between eraser and black pen line. If you look closely, he has even added a basic dot pattern screen tone to the character's thin lips, which is something that would be terribly annoying to cut out with an X-Acto knife, and then apply directly to the paper using physical screen tone. In the end, no matter what tools he has used, this single, incredibly detailed and textured image has cost him at least 7 hours of his life in solitude. But you get the impressions from Ito's vision and determination that the rich internal life he leads in his mind means he's never truly alone as long as he's working. And also, he always has his cats.